Dr. Vincent Pedre, thanks for coming on with me today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I don't know if I told you, but we've been kind of celebrating Gut Month this month. Every month we have a theme, and I really wanted you on for your own expertise about the gut. But first, I want to get to know you a little better and have our audience get to know you a little better. So I've kind of pulled up some facts on you. You went to school, I graduated from medical school in Miami, is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah, and which is where you're from
yeah.
originally. Is that right too?
Originally, yeah. So I went back home for medical school, which was really nice.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
Sunny Miami.
Gorgeous. Yeah, I love it. I also was reading that you have some additional certifications in yoga and medical acupuncture. Was that always, that natural medicine, alternative medicine piece, was that always important to you before you entered medical school, or did that come later?
That came right before medical school. Actually, I finished college in 3.5 years. And so I had 8 months off before starting medical school. And I was looking for answers on some things like I was a very type A, externally looked calm, but internally I was basically a storm in my mind. So I was looking for answers on how I could be at more peace. And meditation and yoga came up, and I started reading books by Andrew Weil, Deepak Chopra, and really kind of laid the foundation for what would become my path in medicine later on before I started medical school.
Yeah, I love Deepak Chopra. I love Andrew Weil as well. I mean, we were talking offline about how you can get haters the bigger you get, and I'm sure those guys get some haters, but their work is solid, and they've really made strides in our field, and they've got traditional training as well, kind of like you do. So yeah, I love.
They were pioneers because, talk about really starting off when there was no paradigm in that direction, and they basically uh, laid out a roadmap on a completely different way of thinking
Yeah,
about health. And that
yeah,
was a huge departure from, Western medicine at the time, even though it really is not a departure from the roots of medicine historically in China, in India with the Ayurveda. So it was basically we've kind of come full circle. And it's funny you say it's gut month, and if you think about like how Western medicine came to be in the early days of this country, US, there was naturopathic medicine and allopathic medicine, and they were both as strong. And naturopathic medicine always believed in the importance of gut health and healing the body. And then that eventually got lost because we really became pharmaceutical focused and put a lot of money behind allopathic medicine to support the pharmaceutical industry, and naturopathy kind of died off for a while. Just became the less dominant uh, twin that wasn't getting a lot of the food, so it became out much smaller. And the other one, the allopathic medicine, became very strong. So it's kind of cool that after 100 years, we're coming full circle and realizing through scientific research that the gut and the gut microbiome is essential to our health. And it is, we're just at the tip of the iceberg in discovering what we can learn about how the gut microbiome affects our health.
Yeah, there's so much new research being done, and I think it's exciting and it's needed for this day and age where we need research to help us, believe things. And frankly, our food supply is so different and stress, and we really need to go back to the gut. And you're right, natural medicine has always played a role. I was an acupuncturist many years. There was one school of thought in the long history of Chinese medicine that was really focused on the gut. It's always been a part, but there was one school of thought that was focused on the gut. Yeah, and really even as modern medicine came up, the AMA really persecuted homeopaths and those schools. So, but the truth is we need it. So it's coming back. And I love to see this integration. You're a trained, medical doctor, but you also have this functional integrative approach. So I think it's really exciting, and I think medicine has to change with the time, and this is the time. Our time is our time. I think our
I
time
think,
is functional medicine. Yeah.
well, I think it's necessary because if we don't, the medical system is going to sink itself in cost of caring for disease rather than promoting health. And I think
Yeah.
we're realizing that the disease model of medicine has failed. All it does is it um, manages disease, but it doesn't reverse disease. And
Yeah.
we just saw the first paper published showing that functional medicine had positive results, uh, positive and quantifiable results at the Cleveland Clinic that compared to like standard methods of therapy, that you can really make an impact in people's lives with this personalized lifestyle medicine.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. So I wanted to ask you one more thing about your bio that I thought was interesting. In my site and our community, we talk a lot about detox, and you did some work after 9/11 about toxins that people
Mm.
encountered, um, which I've heard a little bit about from like the emergency workers and stuff. But I wanted to just if you could share just a little bit about that experience for you and also what you learned about toxins.
That was quite fascinating because we were seeing all the people who didn't have um, some sort of health coverage, like the firemen had their coverage that was seeing them for their exposures, and the policemen. But then there was all these groups of people that went in and did a whole bunch of recovery work on the pile, let's call it, that smoldering pile of metal and building and dust. And a lot of these were Ecuadorians, surprisingly, who were
Huh.
trained in asbestos. They were trained in asbestos remediation. So we had, I basically helped create all of the Spanish paperwork, and I interviewed and saw a lot of the Spanish speaking patients along with English speakers as well. And we saw a lot of respiratory disease and also a lot of, I mean, I think it's hard to say what's triggered by what, but there was definitely an increase in chronic sinus congestion, respiratory disease, and even just mental emotional states, PTSD, as a
Really?
result of having been involved in working on the World Trade Center pile after the disaster. Uh, we were measuring like routine lab work, but we weren't looking at, I think since then, because I was basically um, part of the arm that launched the program. So I was the very first year of the program. So we were just basically had federal funding to get started, but still it wasn't very fancy in the sense that we could diagnose, but we didn't have funding to treat. And it was later on after I left, within a year or two, they started getting more funding where they had an ear, nose, throat specialist, and they were able to start seeing people and treating them. And I think, now years later, they're really looking to see, is there an increase in cancer rates in relation to the
Mm-hmm.
exposures? I mean, I've met patients who were living near there who were then diagnosed with cancer, like a Hodgkin's lymphoma,
Oh, wow.
after the World Trade Center event. But I think we're still kind of, that's a long lead item to gather that information. I would have been curious because back then I didn't know a lot of functional medicine or even toxicology, and thinking about like exposure to heavy metals, you know, uh, mercury, lead, like was that increase because of the disaster? What else could have gotten into the air? We know that they stopped using asbestos, I think around floor 30 something of the World Trade Center when it was being constructed. So there was a
Mm.
law passed that asbestos could no longer be used in buildings. But the first 30 some floors of both towers did have asbestos as their fire retardant material. So all of that got pulverized and put in the air, and we know that
Wow.
it takes a long time for that to manifest as the most common uh, cancer that would cause is mesothelioma. So it was quite fascinating meeting, you know, kind of like the non-glorious workers, the people who really no one ever knew they were there, because they weren't policemen, they weren't firemen, but they worked on the pile for months at a time, doing asbestos removal, helping, you know, with a bunch of the recovery work. So it was quite fascinating. Also, we saw some of the people who, I think eventually people who lived near that area were also qualified to be part of
Mm,
the screening program if you had been near the pile, because if you remember, it was burning for a couple of months. There was like
wow. No, I don't think
it
I knew
wasn't,
that.
yeah, there was low grade fire and smoke. I mean, you could smell it in the air in Manhattan after the disaster, and depending on which way the winds were blowing, because that happened in September of 2001. And in the spring of 2002, I went for a run in Central Park, and I was a big avid runner at the time. And halfway through my run, my lungs closed. And I think I was already at the World Trade Center program. So I did pulmonary function tests and found that I had what would have been the typical finding from kind of getting exposed to a lot of particulate matter in the air, which was small airway disease. And I had never
Mm,
had, I mean, I was a fast runner, and I had to stop running in the middle of my run. I had like what you would call an asthma attack, and I never had asthma.
yeah. I think there's like this respiratory sources of toxins are sort of more acute, so we can appreciate them more. And um, other ways are more insidious, but not being able to breathe. And it happens a lot in developing communities or developing nations too, because their living conditions are such that you're exposed to more pollutants and toxins. So yeah, that's one big respiratory disease. There's the one big one. And like you mentioned, there could be things slowly building too in your health. So I hope they
Yeah,
do
and
connect to that.
if there are internal issues that are not necessarily favorable to an anti-inflammatory environment. So back then, my diet wasn't as clean as it is now, and I was still eating a lot of inflammatory foods. That was in my late 20s.
Mm.
So I still didn't have all the knowledge of how to eat as healthy as I do now, knowing functional medicine and knowing the effects of wheat gluten on the gut permeability, and as well as other foods like dairy that can cause allergic reactions or even just increased mucus production in the
Mm-hmm.
airway, which then allows you to trap more allergens inside your airway and makes them more allergenic. So I wasn't eating the best diet. So let's say I was on a more pro-inflammatory diet back then. And so that on top of external exposures, because we always find it's the interaction of the external environment with the internal environment. And we can think of the gut as part of that very key internal environment that can help either increase inflammation in the body if you're eating the wrong foods, or it can also help reduce inflammation if you're eating a lot of anti-inflammatory foods and plant-based omega-3 rich foods that can help reduce inflammation in the body.
That's true. That's a good segue to talking about your book and your work. It's funny. You're thinking about where I was that when 9/11 happened, because we all can remember. And I was just starting acupuncture school, but similar. I didn't eat. I still ate wheat and dairy, and my diet came around.
Yeah, I
Years
mean,
later.
I was working in Mount Sinai Hospital, and there is no philosophy there about what's healthy to, like uh, the residents were served pizza at lunchtime if we were having a lunchtime lecture, and there was Coke and Diet Coke. And sure, there was also bottled water, great. So either you're getting sugary soda, you're getting aspartame, which causes a disruption in your gut microbiome, or you're drinking water that probably traveled and went through multiple temperature changes and in a BPA bottle that's going to give you xenoestrogens. So you're getting exposed to environmental toxins, and you're also getting exposed to inflammatory foods while you're at the hospital taking care of patients.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
makes no sense. And maybe once in a blue moon there might have been a little bit of a salad available, but most of the time it was just pizza and soda and some waters, and that was our lunch to stay awake while we were sleep deprived and watching a lunchtime lecture. Pretty
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, I was just reading our friend Tony Ewan's book about his start in residency, and yeah, he ate horribly, just candy bars and soda. My training being in Chinese medicine school was a little different. At least we were drinking tea and learning about food properties, but I think there were some big elephants in the room with like gluten and dairy and like processed foods that weren't being addressed. I just don't think it had like integrated, the kind of traditional piece
Yeah.
with like what we were offered in modern society as food. So I think that's changing. But when I was, 2001, there was a bit of a disconnect. So I also read that you had your own personal experience with IBS, which maybe partially drove your work in gut health and working with patients. I wonder if you could share a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, probably starting around age 10, I had been exposed to lots of rounds of antibiotics because it just seemed to be part of the kind of the standard of medical care. If you went to the doctor with a sinus infection, they would give you an antibiotic. Uh, but I was probably put on antibiotics 2 or 3 times per year throughout my teenage years. And I think as a result, I mean, looking back, I know it caused the severe dysbiosis. I then developed leaky gut syndrome and reactions to the two biggest food groups that were in my diet back then were wheat, which includes gluten, and dairy. So ice cream, cereal with milk, sandwiches, bread. I'm Cuban background, so Cuban bread was big. My grandmother constantly made me pound cake, and that was her way of showing me her love. Little did she know that she was slowly poisoning my gut by giving me delicious pound cake, by the way. It was probably the best cake that I've ever had, homemade. But I couldn't gain weight. Once I went through my growth spurt, I was really skinny and I could not put on weight, and I probably wasn't absorbing my nutrients properly. And looking back, I know I had leaky gut, I had a disordered gut microbiome, and it really took a very long time for me to slowly, as I went through medical school with very little nutrition training, start to figure out, okay, if I eat dairy, my immune system is weaker, and I tend to get sick more often. So kind of my first aha was taking dairy or limiting dairy in the diet and finding that I wasn't getting sick as often because I really had such a weak immune system that the pediatricians would tell my parents, you have to give him a multivitamin. He's not eating enough. But if you looked at the calories I was taking in per day, it was probably over 3,000 calories a day. So I was eating a lot. I just wasn't absorbing the nutrients. And I even at some point had to get IgG injections,
Wow.
immunoglobulin injections when I was sick because even with an antibiotic, sometimes I wouldn't clear the infection. And really, if you look back, like now we know, like, how do you rebuild the immune system? The biggest presence of the immune system is in the gut, 70% of your immune system patrolling the whole length of the gut. And the way to rebuild your immunity is to fix the gut, to improve the gut barrier using probiotics, um, changing the diet. A lot of what I talk about in my book, Happy Gut. So I took these experiences and I really became fascinated with the gut and gut health and started working with patients on gut health issues and realized that a lot of people didn't have the proper guidance on what to do with their gut health. And I thought, well, it's really not that complicated. I mean, it is at times, and I do now get a lot of complicated cases, but for a lot of people, it's quite simple. It's just really tweaking the diet, and it's remarkable tweaking the diet, getting good probiotic, maybe some prebiotics, making sure to get probiotic rich food, cutting out sugar. You know, it's simple interventions that can create a really great big impact on your health, and it's by focusing on gut health. So that really shaped what the type of impact that I decided I wanted to have, uh, because of my own struggles with IBS and wanting to shorten that for other people and help them realize the interconnectedness with gut health and so many other aspects of health, like even just feeling fatigued, achy, mentally foggy. I mean, I used to maybe have a piece of bread and then feel like I had been drugged. You know,
Mm,
you feel like this wave of, it's almost like you can't stay awake. And we know that gluten gets metabolized into morphine-like substances called gluteomorphins that act like morphine on the brain. And same thing that happens with casein, which is the protein from milk. That's why if you give your baby milk at bedtime, it makes them sleepy because it
mm,
gets metabolized into these morphine-like chemicals, but not necessarily good for them.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and sometimes I think you don't realize the symptoms till you take a break from it because you have symptoms all the time. We have a lot. I feel like we have a lot in common with our history. Like I took a ton of antibiotics for sinus infections when I was a kid, and then that kind of got better. But then I was an adult, I would always have just like upset stomach or loose stool, and I was always having gluten or dairy or sugar or whatever. So like there was no association what gave me what, right? But once you take it out, you can often see, see the effects more often. And I was reading your info, like you don't have dairy much, but maybe occasional. And like I barely have dairy, but every now and then I'm like, oh, I'm gonna try it again. So I had some a few days ago, and man, it just sat in my stomach like a rock. And I don't think I would have observed that, 20 years ago when I was
I,
having it often.
I I think that's a really good point for people because a lot of people get very confused about food reactions and why they are having them, or that they weren't having them when they had the food and now they took it out and tried to reintroduce it. And now they're having a food reaction. And I think what happens, one, a lot of times people are not aware of the types of reactions they're having. But also, we know when the immune system is overwhelmed, there might be so many things going on that it's not going to clearly give you feedback on what exactly the food is doing, but it's creating this system-wide alert in your body. And I'll give an example. When I took wheat out, which was wheat gluten, which was about 11 years ago, when I first reintroduced it, and I did 3 months to begin with, and then tested it out. And I was at a restaurant and I missed rye bread. So I had a piece of toast, rye toast. And immediately the insides of my wrist started itching, like within
Mm,
10 minutes. And it was a very faint rash. So I didn't get hives or anything, but I thought, oh, that's really strange. But, I'm a doctor, so I'm always paying really close attention to something like that. Another person might maybe feel that and then, but not make the association. So they won't register it, which is part of the challenge of doing food reintroduction, is you really have to train people that it could be anything and anything unexpected that happens in your body that you need to look out for. So at that point, I said, okay, this is strange. I don't know if the rye bread caused that, but I'm going to avoid gluten for another 3 months. Because I knew I had had a blood test and I knew that I react to gluten with an immune response. 6 months passed, I do it again, and guess what? Within 10 minutes, same reaction. Okay, so now twice it's happened. So now I'm like, okay, this is not so random. There is actually something going on here. And each time I gave it another 3 months, wanting to see, is this going to go away? Eventually, after avoiding gluten for probably 2 years, it did go away where I can have an exposure and I'm not gonna start getting itchy. But it all depends on the situation. It depends on where you're at. A lot of people have less reactions when they're traveling in Europe, and the type of wheat in Europe is different from the US wheat. It's closer to ancient wheat. But those are things that I get asked a lot. But even for the dairy, like luckily, because I do love cheese, I can still have cheese in the summer months. And I tell people I basically eat dairy cyclically, and I know that my least problematic time of the year is the summer. Spring, I have to worry about allergies. Fall, I have to worry about allergies, but also viruses. And winter, more colds, flus, viruses. So this was after years of experimentation. I figured out that not having dairy in the fall, winter, spring, except for maybe occasional feta cheese, which is easier to digest than cow's milk dairy or sheep's milk cheese, that I got sick less often and I didn't get as mucusy, but I miss it. So I also figured out that I could have it in the summer months
Hmm.
and it doesn't cause a big problem. Again, it depends. Every person is different, individual. If you have a lactose intolerance and you want to have cheese, you're going to tolerate an aged cheese better than a cheese that is younger because it's going to have more lactose. But if
Mm.
you have a histamine intolerance, so for example, you drink a glass of wine and you immediately get congested, that's a sign of histamine intolerance, then you're not going to do well with an aged cheese or even with fermented foods because they're going to be high in histamines or histamine generating substances, and that can also cause a problem. So it does get kind of it starts to get really complicated, but at the root of it is you have to listen to your body. If you're connected to and listening to your body astutely and you're seeing how things affect you, then it becomes more a matter of choice. Do I want to feel this way? Or do I want to be stubborn and keep eating cheese because I love cheese, but every time I do, I keep getting sick? Or am I going to become aware and see, well, this is causing damage to me, and what's more important to me is my health and how I feel, or that transient pleasure of having cheese? By the way, there's some really great vegan cheeses that I have discovered, so I can fulfill my cheese cravings when it's it's fall, winter, spring, and not have to worry so much about allergies and viruses and stuff.
True, because you're just craving that richness, right? So I love that brand Kite Hill that does like a ricotta cheese, and
Oh yeah,
that's so nice and rich. I can't even tell the difference
I think I
really.
just discovered they make a coconut yogurt as well, right? Coconut milk yogurt.
Yeah, they do. They have some yogurts. Uh-huh. And I love the
Yeah, I just discovered
GTs.
that.
Yeah, GTs also makes a coconut yogurt in a tiny jar that our friend
Oh, nice.
Rita Marie Lascalzo introduced me to. It is so like dense and like just really amazing if you're also wanting that creaminess. So yeah, there's things out
I
there.
also
Go ahead.
I also discovered Dr. Cow's cashew cheeses,
Oh, I haven't
which
seen
are
that.
which are really good, and they make a sour cream that comes in a jar with basically it's just cashews and live cultures, and it's so creamy, and I feel like I'm not paid by them, by the way, so I feel like I'm I'm advertising for Dr. Cow's. I don't really I'm I don't promote any particular brand, but I really love them, and I love the tanginess of sour cream, which
Mm.
sometimes I miss, and it's nice to put on things. I actually just will put it on toast, which is kind of crazy, but I kind of like my toast with a little bit of a sour tinge to it.
Yeah, I mean, this is not exactly health food, but like you said, we get cravings for things we had growing up. Sometimes I'll have like these skinny gluten-free bagels with like dairy-free cream cheese, like not very often, but sometimes you just want to mix up your routine and like have something that I
I
ate
think
a
that's
lot of
important,
bagels back in the day.
because yeah, me too. I mean, I didn't even, believe it or not, before I moved to New York in the late, or before I went, actually, I should say before I went to college in New York State, I had never heard of or knew that a bagel existed. And I was like 17 years old. I'd never heard
Yeah,
of
it
them.
is pretty regional. Like some people aren't into bagels, or here in Arizona, I can only think of like one bagel shop. It's not too big. But some things I like that we're talking about is like it's okay to maybe like indulge that taste craving that you want and maybe find other ways. I like that we're talking about sort of the gray area of food sensitivities and that there's a lot of types, right? Because I think when people are
Yeah.
embarking on this path, they're like, oh, I gave up gluten for a week or a month and I didn't feel anything. Or I tried to have the X and I couldn't tell. But you have to become a better listener to your body, and that's a process.
Yeah. And it's also the question of how long is long enough, and how many foods do you have to remove? So if you have 3 food sensitivities, and those 3 food sensitivities are like thumbtacks that you're sitting on, if you remove one, are you not going to feel a pinch anymore? You're still sitting on 2 other thumbtacks.
True.
So if you remove gluten, but you're also having reactions to other foods, you might still not feel well. And then you're going to say, well, taking gluten out didn't help. But it was really that you had to take gluten, dairy, and soy out, and then you would have seen an improvement. And then as you introduce one at a time, you would have seen what type of symptoms they cause in you, or how they make you feel tired or fatigued, mentally foggy, or you might even break out in hives. I've seen that many times with patients who were not having hives before removing gluten. Once they try to reintroduce it, their body breaks out in hives and they're freaking out saying, well, what's going on? This never happened before. And it's that now your immune system can actually speak to you clearly and accurately. And whereas before it was so overwhelmed by all of the different inflammatory antigenic foods, once you clear the slate, it's so much easier for your body to tell you, hey, this isn't working for me and you should not eat this.
Yeah.
That's the magic of an elimination diet. And I think I think the hardest thing that I hear is that patients, they get married to a certain way of eating, and they have a hard time surrendering to the fact that maybe they actually have to give up what they thought was healthy or what they thought was okay for them to do, and redefine their relationship with food and which foods are good so they can be happy and healthy.
Yes, and that I think it's okay to acknowledge those emotions that come up around that, right? Like things we've done for a long time, things that give us pleasure, and to think like, oh, I'm never going to have a bagel again. That can be very emotional, and you have cultural things coming in. But I always encourage people just try something. You don't have to think I'm never having a bagel again. Just try something on. We'll talk more about your book in a second and the concepts there, but like just have an open mind because you want to feel better. There's some reason they came to see
And
you.
honestly, I would miss bread for the rest of my life, but I found the best gluten-free bread
Tell
that
us.
is better than any bread that I've ever found in the supermarket. It's by a company in Kingston, New York called Merida's Bread, and you can actually find them online. They make all sorts of both healthy and unhealthy baked goods, but their gluten-free bread is by far, I think, the best gluten-free bread because it's made with psyllium, flax, chia, so it's a very high fiber type of bread, and it has the squishiness and the sponginess of a regular bread. So it takes away all the elements of missing all of the beautiful things about bread, and it just brings joy to my life to be able to have a slice of that toast. But also it's very dense, so even one slice, like making an avocado toast with their gluten-free bread, like the regular gluten-free breads that are white, like they're simple starch, so if you have sugar issues, they're going to bump your blood sugar. But this bread, because it has a lot of fiber in it, it actually doesn't bump your blood sugar in the same way, and is very filling because of the fiber, and it's good for your microbiome to have all those that flax, psyllium, and chia fiber from the seeds, the ground up seeds. So it's one of my favorite cheats on bread if you're gluten free, and I have not found any place that makes a better one. I mean, they make a rosemary olive loaf. I mean, that is delicious.
That sounds really good.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, so for those people, they ship all over the country too. I mean, you can order it. I luckily go to the farmers market here in New York, and I'm able to find it. They go to several farmers markets, but they
Yeah, I
are,
haven't
I
seen
don't know,
that.
I haven't run into another one that's as good as that.
Okay, I'll check that out. We should start getting paid money to endorse. People want to know these things, you know. I think you and I and other practitioners have tried a lot of brands, so it's kind of fun. So I want to get to your book, which is called Happy Gut. There's a subtitle you can share with us. But I love the name because when people are having bloating or constipation, loose stool, food intolerances, they just know they don't have a happy gut. And it sucks because you're
Yeah,
reminded every day that you don't have it.
yeah.
So you want
Yeah, I
that
think the
goal.
gut is the gut could be your biggest source of misery. And ask any woman, any guy who's been bloated and feeling like your clothes doesn't fit by the end of the day, and you think you feel like you're 3 months pregnant. It's miserable, but it's also the key to happiness. So if your gut is happy, then your brain is going to be happy. And it sounds very simple, but also, the gut is a source of a great amount of neurotransmitters through the gut microbiome. And if your gut is inflamed, then your brain is going to be inflamed. They say if your gut is on fire, your brain is going to be on fire. And a brain on fire is a depressed brain. It's a brain that doesn't feel well. It's going to feel depressed and anxious. And if you reduce the inflammation in your gut, then your brain is going to feel better. So that's sort of where the name Happy Gut came. It was originally going to be titled Happy Gut, Happy Life. And we just decided that it was just nicer to just use the shortened version. That's what we were calling it as we were writing the book, Happy Gut instead of Happy Gut, Happy Life. We decided it's just too long to say the two happy, so we'll just keep it at Happy Gut. Simple.
Well, yeah, we can infer that you will have a happy life when you have a happy gut. So one thing you just mentioned was fiber. I went to a microbiome conference recently, and we talked a lot about fiber, and and it's so important and so simple. And you mentioned the bread. Is that one of the tenets of your book? And how do you personally get in lots of fibers if that's what you advocate?
Yeah, absolutely. I get fiber through different sources. We know there's soluble and insoluble fibers. There's different foods that have the different types. And you have to think of like insoluble fibers is the type of roughage that kind of scrapes the inside of your gut and moves food down. But the soluble fibers are kind of what create bulk and substance and kind of help bulk up the stool. So you need a combination of both types of fiber. And the soluble fiber also is really helpful in reducing the rate at which sugar gets absorbed into your bloodstream. So it can really help with controlling blood sugar, even, for example, in the case of um, oatmeal, it can also help with cholesterol, lower the cholesterol. So I love, I have oatmeal as one of my, gluten-free oatmeal as one of my fiber sources. And a lot of times I will kind of make it into a super meal by adding protein powder to my oatmeal. And then, of course, berries and ground flax and sometimes nuts and maybe slices of banana. I kind of switch it up. Uh, but a lot of the fiber I get is through greens, through vegetables, through roughage. And I think that's a really important source of fiber. But for people who have really inflamed gut or a lot of gut issues, they may not be able to tolerate raw vegetables. So a lot of times those have to start with cooked, and then as the gut health improves, then that you can move towards more raw veggies. But it's all part of my program. I call it my gut care program, and care standing for cleanse, activate, restore, enhance, and it's the different steps of putting the gut back into balance. Cleanse is about taking out the inflammatory foods and also about reestablishing a proper balance between bad bugs and good bugs in the gut. And activate is about restoring digestive enzyme function
Hmm.
and reducing inflammation in the gut, maybe through omega-3s, digestive enzymes. Restore is about restoring the gut microbiomes. A lot of people do my program, and probably the majority of people out there have had some insult to their gut. Let's say the primary insult, we talked about it earlier for both you and I, antibiotics, but we're also getting a whole bunch of other insults to the gut, like pesticides in our food, the constant stress that people live in modern society. All those things attack the gut and change the gut microbiome. Then throw in things like artificial sweeteners, processed foods. All those things alter the makeup of the gut microbiome, or the fast foods, like, fast food chain restaurants with all of their chemically laden foods. And then enhance is about healing the gut lining. So using nutrients like licorice, deglycerinated licorice, DGL, and L-glutamine, quercetin, uh, collagen powder, things that provide the essential nutrients, building blocks for the gut to be able to heal itself. And that's part of a complete program that, many people want to know, what do I eat? What supplements do I take? But really, Happy Gut is a mind, body, spirit program with yoga poses, meditations, breathing exercises. Because for me, it's an all integrated whole. And the only way to heal is to really heal all aspects of gut health. And I know you talk a lot about detox, and we know that if your gut microbiome is imbalanced, that you will recirculate estrogens back into the body, because the microbiome, certain types of bacteria have an enzyme called beta glucuronidase that will release conjugated estrogen that's basically been anchored and ready to be pushed out with your poop, releases the estrogen and allows it to recirculate. But it can also do that to xenoestrogens as well. So if you have a disordered gut microbiome, it can cause hormonal imbalances within the body that lead to things like estrogen dominance.
Yes, as well as other like toxic metabolites can be re-released as well. So yeah, it's an important part. And the gut, frankly, yeah, the gut is complicated. Let's be honest. It's taken me many years to understand the gut, and I probably am only a portion of the way there. So I like that your program is more comprehensive. I think, yeah, people can get frustrated thinking, oh, well, I took out gluten, I'm not better. Well, there's just so much, like you said, to
Yeah,
heal and
I
stuff.
mean, just to give you like a little tidbit, like, okay, you took out gluten, but are you still eating your lunch brushed at your work desk while you're trying to complete 3 tasks at the same time? Then you've missed the whole part of the point. You can't heal your gut unless you do kind of like a full mind, body, spirit, like take a moment to be grateful, to
Mm.
breathe, to get yourself into a more relaxed parasympathetic state, which is the state in which your body can digest and accept food and nutrition.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. We just talked to this lovely college professor as a client, and she's eating really well, but she's just eating on the run and grazing. So yeah, sometimes it's the way you eat as well. So we'll share the link to the book. It's in paperback now, so it's really affordable. It's on Amazon and other sites. But you also had another free gift, or a free gift for us, called the Gut Reboot. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So it's at my website, happygutlife.com/gut reboot. And it's basically a 3-day quick gut reboot. It's all diet based, so there are no supplements. It's basically a program that I put together for people who wanted an introduction to gut healing, or just need like a quick, maybe you've been eating off, going out to uh, takeout, or eating out a lot, and just don't feel like your gut is happy. And it's something you can do over a weekend, starting on a Friday and finishing on a Sunday. And it's still kind of always incorporating kind of mind, body, spirit type approach. So thinking about food, but also stopping to meditate and relax. But it basically in 3 days tells people exactly what to do. And I give recipes for different meals that can be made during the 3 days and advice on what to eat, what not to eat. And I think it just makes it easy for people to kind of get an introduction to what is it like to sort of clean out your diet for a few days, and how do you feel at the end of it, and could it be the stepping stone for something even greater?
I like that. I like that. And it's all free and recipes and all that, right?
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Well, we will put the link to that under the video as well. My last question is not really important except to be, but I think I heard you're a Virgo. Is that right?
I am.
Okay. What's your
Yes.
birthday?
August 28th.
Okay. I'm the 5th. So I was like, we have so much in common. I'm not surprised that we're both Virgos too. A lot of healers are Virgos, right? And we're sensitive and our guts are sensitive.
Basically, yeah. I mean, we're earth signs, so we're very kind of rooted and connected
That's a good
with
point. The earth is the
with
gut. Yeah.
yeah. Well, the gut is like or even just thinking of plants, like the soil is like the microbiome, and the roots of the plant are like our gut. So the gut is like the roots of the body.
You just helped me remember. I couldn't remember the name of that Chinese school of thought, but it was Earth School. The Earth School was when they were
Oh,
really focused on the gut for like, a period of a century, or I don't know how long it was. But I think it's pretty cool that that went on so long ago and now it's kind of
thanks.
coming back. So thank you again, Dr. Pedre, for your expertise and spending time with us. And I encourage people to check out his work. It's really accessible, and you can tell he's really put a lot of time and attention into this subject to help you. So thanks again, Dr. Pedre.
Thanks for having me.